In this tutorial, I'm going to give a quick overview of the concept of inheritance. This is one of the cornerstones of object-oriented programming, and because of that, we're going to be using it throughout the rest of the semester. So what you see here is an example of what some of the classes in your game might look like. We could have a flame particle class that has a texture 2D, a sprite, a position, a rotation, and so on. We could also have a player class, and it too could have a texture 2D, a sprite, a position, and so on. Notice that these classes are not identical, but they do have a lot of overlap. In fact, they both have an update method as well as a render method. In general, anytime you see that we have redundant code, especially when you're copying and pasting, we're probably doing something wrong. So here's the big picture idea. The first thing that we need to do is to identify all of the common elements across the classes that we have. In this case, you can see that Flame Particle and Player have 5 of the same attributes, and they also have 2 of the same methods. Because that's the case, we can create a new class, in this case it's called GameObject, and put that common code inside. Now realize that it doesn't have to be called GameObject, you can call it anything you want, but I'm going to be setting up code examples that have a generic GameObject class in them. The next part is huge. Because we have all of the code up in the GameObject class, we no longer have to have it in Flame Particle or Player. Instead, we can say that both Flame Particle and Player inherit from the GameObject class, and we get all of those attributes and methods without having to specify them. In other words, Flame Particle and Player absorbed properties from GameObject. Now notice how this was done. We used the colon operator to say that one class is going to inherit from another one. Also notice that we have arrows that point up to GameObject. This notation is commonly screwed up because it's natural for us to think that inheritance goes down to the player and to the Flame Particle. Now, because Flame Particle inherits from GameObject, it actually has 7 attributes. 5 that it inherited from GameObject, and then 2 additional ones that it added. If you look at Player, it has 8 attributes, the 5 that it inherited, and then it added 3 more. Now, depending on which language you're in, you're going to hear different terminology. Some folks say that GameObject is a parent class, and Flame Particle and Player are child classes. And some people are going to say that GameObject is a base class, and the other 2 are derived classes, especially the C++ folks. And then some people say that GameObject is a superclass and the other 2 are subclasses. It all basically means the same thing. Good. Now, both of these classes also inherited 2 methods from GameObject. It may be a little bit weird at first, but you have to understand that because of inheritance, there's some invisible code in these classes. So then there's the question of what do you do if you don't like the methods that you inherit? For example, not all GameObjects update themselves the same. And some GameObjects might have a fancier way of rendering, like special effects or health bars. So what do you do? It's actually easy. You just override it, which means to redefine the method. Don't confuse this term, though, with overloading, which is when you have 2 functions with the same name. Overriding means to rewrite the method that was inherited. In fact, you'll see that the word override is a keyword in many languages. So in summary, inheritance is when one class absorbs the properties of another class. Realize that not everything is inherited, though, including constructors and anything that's marked as private. And we'll talk about that in a second. However, there are numerous benefits to using inheritance, including good design and smaller and more maintainable code. For example, if you find a bug and you fix it in a parent class, the child classes get those updates for free. Also, just as a reminder, remember that the term override simply means to redefine a method that you inherited. Inheritance also introduces some new keywords, including public, private, protected, and internal, which we won't be talking about. Public means that everybody can see it, meaning that it's visible outside of a class. For example, if you mark an attribute or variable as being public, it can be seen from just about any other part of the code. Private, on the other hand, means that it's visible from only inside the class. You would mark something as private if you didn't want any other code tampering with your variables. Also, remember that private variables are not inherited. Finally, there's the protected keyword, which means that only that class or any subclasses can see it. And this can be useful in certain situations, but we'll move on. Now, one other thing that we need to talk about is the concept of multiple inheritance, or inheriting from more than one class. This isn't allowed in many languages, including C#, and you may ask why not. Look at the situation that we have here. Let's say that we wanted to create a wolfman that inherits from both wolf and man. Let's also say that both of these classes define a method called run. The question is, when you tell a wolfman to run, which one does it run like, the wolf or the man? The problem gets even worse in scenarios like you see here, where man and wolf both inherit from the same class. This is known as the diamond of death and can become problematic in a hurry. Finally, you need to understand that inheritance is recursive, meaning that a class inherits not only from its parent, but also from its grandparent and all the way up the tree. Believe it or not, all classes inherit from a class called object, whether you like it or not. So that means that there's even more invisible code that you may not have realized was there. So that's it. Hopefully you have a better understanding of what inheritance is and why it's beneficial, and in the next tutorial we'll see how it's done in C#.